Welcome to another episode of the BoxJumper Podcast. It's been far too long since I sat in front of this microphone, but I'm excited to get back to bringing fitness talk to your ears. I'm your host, John St. Amand. I'm a 40-something CrossFit athlete, trainer, and weightlifting coach in Bedford, Nova Scotia, Canada. I suspect many of the folks listening were introduced to the Olympic lifts at their local CrossFit gym. That was certainly my entry point. CrossFit borrowed what was effective in a variety of sport-specific disciplines and blended them together, envisioning a training methodology that has no specialty and spit out athletes that were generally physically capable no matter the task presented. This meant blending gymnastics, throwing, pulling, pushing, running, climbing, jumping, and weightlifting into long workouts, short workouts, and everything in between. And I know from experience that it works. I'm fitter than I was in my 20s. Makes me wish I had found this type of training much sooner. Not for the sake of the training, but for the transference to everyday life's physical and mental challenges. And that's at the heart of what helped make CrossFit become popular. It really works, and it's explicitly without specialty. And with that popularity, more and more people were exposed to Olympic lifting, which had been a sport that was respected but certainly not practiced by the masses. And when CrossFit took off, so too did Olympic weightlifting as a pursuit. It started as thousands and is now in the millions of everyday people learning to snatch and clean and jerk. And that meant opportunity. Enter Greg Everett. Now very well known around the world as a coach to successful elite-level Olympic weightlifters. He too was introduced to the sport through CrossFit. But at the very beginning, before CrossFit's explosion, not only was he hooked, but he saw a real need for education in the space. This was before YouTube, let alone Instagram and all the other platforms that make information on every manner of subject matter accessible, though not of all equal quality. There were very few resources in those days to help athletes learn even the basics. Without a capable in-person coaching environment, how was an athlete expected to learn? By virtue of his introduction to the sport at this time, Greg happened upon a mission to help others with learning resources that he felt strongly he would have benefited from had they been available to him. And when that was well received, he took it further, seeking to help train other coaches on how to better instruct athletes in their training environments, to make other coaches better. That's at the heart of what Catalyst Athletics does. Greg and his wife Amy, herself a coach to elite weightlifters including Maddie Rogers, a 4-time silver medalist at the World Weightlifting Championships, among other accolades, run Catalyst Athletics together, providing private training to elite athletes as well as running specialized training camps for athletes, certification programs for coaches, and more. Greg and Amy have invested considerable time and effort building a business that trains not just champion lifters, but trains an entire generation of trainers in the methodology that they have crafted. In 10 seconds, I'll chat with Greg Everett, world-renowned weightlifting coach to elite athletes and coaches alike, educator and author, lecturer, and a guy who cuts to the chase while pursuing opportunity where he sees it. Greg Everett of Catalyst Athletics. Welcome to the BoxJumper Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm a Catalyst Athletics fan. I've got my L1. Did the program here several years ago now when one of your trainers came to Halifax and did a seminar here with probably a group of 20 people. And a whole bunch of us wound up getting our Catalyst certifications at the time. And so I've kind of wanted to talk to you for a long time. And when I started the podcast, honestly, I chickened out of messaging you to ask. But one of my fellow athletes and a Catalyst certified weightlifter herself happened upon a post in which you had been tagged and you had replied that you had never turned down a podcast request.
Oh, yeah.
So she pointed that out to me and I jumped on it. So thank you for your quick response in saying that you'd be a guest.
I just think that's funny. I get that. Like, well, how come you haven't gone on this podcast yet? Like, as if I'm out there turning people down all day long because I'm too cool. Like, they didn't ask me.
Yeah, maybe you just have that aura and people are afraid to ask. But I'm really glad that I reached out. there's so many different potential questions that I could ask. I have kind of a couple of different specific topics that I want to try to address. But before I even get into that, I want to hear from your perspective how you got to be where you are today. Maybe just describe in broad terms what it is that you do now. And then let's back up to, as a kid, what did you do for sport and how did you wind up becoming this well-known weightlifting coach?
Man, I mean, the real quick summary is that it was a series of very fortunate events and great opportunities that I was smart enough to take advantage of when I saw them. And so I would love to take credit as being some kind of genius with this long-term plan to get to where I am, but it was it was really a piecemeal sort of thing, and I just picked up where each opportunity kind of allowed me to go and tried to gain momentum. So currently, I own Catalyst Athletics, which I started in 2006. I now own it with my wife, Amy, of course, who is also a weightlifting coach, the actually most accomplished female weightlifting coach in U.S. history. Uh, she she came on, years ago when we got together. Um, but so I coach a team of competitive lifters. Um, these days only, national championship to world championship level. I don't work with other folks other than that anymore, just because I'm spoiled now. I don't have to have that extensive of an individual coaching demographic to make a living. Um, and I for those people that I'm not coaching personally, I offer online programming and online quote unquote teams. So I'm able to work with literally hundreds of people and still provide some feedback and give them some degree of coaching, although obviously it's far from individualized like I'm doing with my competitive lifters. But that's like a super low barrier to entry, 30-35 bucks a month. So I want to be able to still give those people as much access to me as I can without killing myself working 300 hours a week. um, and then the big part of what I do, that most people, the side that they see is the content production. So articles, books, video, seminars, all these different ways that I'm trying to get more and better information on weightlifting as a sport, as a training methodology, both for athletes and for coaches, primarily for the weightlifting world, but also for people outside the weightlifting world who want to use snatch, clean, jerk variations in their sport training, in their fitness training, whether they're throwers, crossfitters, like it doesn't really matter. I'd like to provide as much as I can for them. um Man, going back, I played all the standard kind of American boy sports growing up, and I can't say I ever particularly loved any of them. Um, it's funny now, like the only sport I watch is baseball, and I only watch San Francisco Giants games because that was my home team growing up. Um, but like I didn't like playing baseball that much as a young kid, probably because I just wasn't as good as I wanted to be, and I wasn't interested enough in putting in the effort either. But so I kind of branched out as I got older into all the weird, obscure sports. So like I was a skateboarder for many years. I rode bike trials competitively for a while. Rock climbing. A lot of outdoor stuff. Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and so just like this really broad collection of largely unrelated sports. And I think what got me to weightlifting eventually was the fact that regardless of what sport I was doing competitively or recreationally, kind of the thing that I enjoyed most was the training and the preparation for that sport over the sport itself, right? And so weightlifting comes along, and it's like, well, the sport is the preparation and vice versa. It's this thing that is, I don't know of any other sport where the gym training is essentially the same, other than powerlifting, obviously. But it was this thing that encompassed so many athletic traits, such a broad array of abilities, and demands, physical and mental. But then also the training itself was so much of it because the competition was, they're so few and far between, versus, baseball, you're playing a million games a season. That I think I just naturally appealed to me because that's what I liked most about every other sport. So yeah, I'll try to wrap it up quickly here. This is going on forever. I'm getting old. It's been a long life. It's so let's see. I became a personal trainer when I was 18. Like I knew I wanted to kind of move in that direction in some way, but that was 1998. And so this was very, very early internet age. It really, there was like, you could
Barely
check your
email at that
stock
point.
prices and, yeah, you
Yeah.
couldn't do much. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity to figure out how to go about doing this stuff unless you happen to know somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't do much with that. I kind of got sidetracked. I ended up going to a total of 3 different colleges. Eventually, I was working on an ambulance. I was doing all kinds of weird stuff, working in bike shops, whatever I wanted to really. And I happened to meet Rob Wolf, who most of your listeners probably know of. Wrote a few books like The Paleo Solution, Wired to Eat. And he and his now wife, Nikki, had just opened a gym in Northern California where I was living at the time, where I went to 2 of my 3 colleges. And so in a roundabout way, I ended up meeting them, and he's like, "Hey, come train with us." And it was the 4th CrossFit gym in existence. And so I had never heard of it. I kind of looked at what they were up to and I was like, this is weird. I don't get it. I was kind of doing my own thing in my garage, had my power rack, whatever. And, but within like 2 days, I was like, okay, I get it. This is actually really awesome. Because at that time it was very different from what it is now. I'm not saying it's bad now, but it was a very different feel and look about it. It was much more stripped down and simple. It was, hey,
It was pretty raw. Yeah.
we're taking gymnastics, sprinting, and weightlifting and combining them in interesting ways to basically develop a really broad array of athletic traits. And that's a very appealing thing to me. As I, was saying, that's what was so interesting to me. So anyway, fast forward, I ended up meeting a lot of people who gave me a lot of good opportunities. Rob Wolf is the one who really like got that whole ball rolling and convinced me like, hey, yeah, you don't have to go work a dumb job that you don't really like. Like you can actually do this stuff for a living. And that wasn't really true right away. It took us a long time to make any money. But now we're both doing okay, thankfully. So anyway, that's my whole life story.
So, did you always gravitate towards a coaching kind of relationship that you had with other people?
That's a good question because it's hard for me to answer. Like I genuinely did not ever plan on being a weightlifting coach, which I know sounds crazy, but it was a role that I really naturally fell into because, yes, people started kind of naturally coming to me and asking for help, asking for advice. And I was just in a position, the circumstances were such that I was kind of in the best position for many people to help them the best possible way, right? I was so good early on because there weren't many options, put it that way. So I talk about great opportunities and having these fortunate events. That's one of them right there, is that if I had gotten into the sport right now, I'd be going up against, a lot of really good, established, well-known coaches who are also putting out content and doing these great things. I didn't have that competition back when I started, very early 2000s. So I was able to generate a lot of momentum and get so far ahead in terms of content production and kind of getting extending my reach out to so many people that I don't think anyone is really reasonably going to be able to catch up at this point. You know what I mean? But that's all
Yeah.
just good luck, essentially.
I mean, your movement library was pretty foundationally established very early on. I remember
Yeah.
referencing it right when I started CrossFit. I was hearing about Catalyst. It just so happens that one of the other trainers in our gym was a Catalyst Athletics weightlifting coach, and so we had a weightlifting side and a CrossFit side, and I mostly stayed over on the CrossFit side, but I did really appreciate the weightlifting side and wanted to get better at it and understand it. And as I started becoming more interested in becoming a coach as a CrossFitter, I wanted to ensure that I was able to learn from the weightlifters to make that part of my CrossFit experience and my training, and particularly my coaching, that much more refined. And so it was constant that they were saying, hey, go take a look at the Catalyst YouTube channel. And
Yeah.
there's like every piece of the lift is broken down into component parts that you can better understand and then see the relationships between them. And that was my first introduction to Catalyst Athletics and you as a communicator. And to me, that I think that might be why you wound up finding yourself in a coaching position without intending to, is that I get the impression that you're just a natural communicator. And so that lends itself to being a coach if you have that discipline and you have that understanding and you have a desire to help others better understand how to move.
Yeah, the way I've described it in the past, especially talking about that first book I put out, is that I essentially felt like I was creating and providing all the material I wished I had had as a kid trying to figure this stuff out, because there was just this massive dearth of quality information on Olympic weightlifting at that time. I didn't speak Russian, and I couldn't just access these manuals. Bud Charniga, ended up translating all these things. But again, and Tommy Kono had a book out, and Artie Dreschler had a book out. But, as good as you could argue they were, they did not, someone with zero experience in weightlifting could not pick up any of that material and learn from day one how to snatch and clean and jerk, how to, write programs, how to do all this stuff. And so I had an opportunity because no one else was doing it that I saw. And I was like, well, am I totally qualified at this point to do this? No, but no one else is doing it. And it's stupid that no one else is doing it. So I'm just going to do it. And it ended up working out okay.
When did that first guide for athletes and coaches start to come together?
Oh gosh,
because you're several editions into it now.
Yeah, I released the first edition in September 2008. But the funny thing about that is that I did not originally intend to write my own book. I actually went to my coach, Mike Bergner, and said, you need to write a weightlifting book. There's nothing out there, like I just explained. I will literally write the whole book for you. I just need a little bit of input here and there. And so he said, yeah, okay. And again, this is early CrossFit days. So he was crushing it with the CrossFit weightlifting seminars and all that stuff. And so I wrote a whole book, using his methodology. And then as I was winding down, he kind of was like, well, I don't really want to put a book out. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to like persuade you to do it. And so I thought about it and the writing I had done, and I said, well, I can use this as basically a template. I created this whole book. I'm going to change it into my own methodology, expand on all the stuff that we weren't going to do with him anyway. And so it ended up growing into this gigantic volume, although it was smaller then, but now it's, I think the last edition was like 250,000 words or just something out of control like that.
It's pretty complete.
Yeah. And yeah. And so again, it was like, it was not my intention originally, but the way the circumstances worked out, it was an opportunity and I jumped on it. And thankfully I did, because that book essentially came the basis for my reputation as a weightlifting coach going forward. And it essentially, it kind of bought me time and opportunity to really develop a reputation as an active coach, and kind of prove myself to the established coaches out there, who I will say there were a lot of established coaches who were very supportive of me from the start, which I'm very grateful for. Guys like John Thrush and Bob Takano and Jim Schmitz and these guys who'd been around, who, normally you would expect them to not be real happy that there's, some propeller head kid coming around and writing a book and, what are his qualifications? And instead they were like, this is really a great book. Like, you've done a great job. And, they would tell people to buy the book. And so that was, again, I keep saying it, but I can't overemphasize how important it was that I had all these amazing opportunities and happened to meet all these great people, who allowed me to kind of capitalize on whatever skills I happen to have to get myself to this position I'm in now.
When you first started assembling it as a book, did you envision it as what it is in its present form, in helping as almost a training manual or Bible for both athletes and coaches alike, so that a coach could take this information and apply it to their athletes in the same way as an athlete could apply it to themselves?
Yeah. And, like, what's the number one rule in writing? Know your audience. And I
Mm.
was always the little brat who was like, well, my audience is everyone, and it's like, well, that doesn't really work. But I tried as much as possible to make that true and to make it accessible to everybody. But yeah, my goal with it was to create, again, that guide that I wanted as a 15-year-old trying to figure out how to snatch and clean and jerk with no resources,
Mm.
that could go from literally, I don't even know what kind of barbell to use. I don't know how to hold it in my hand. I don't know anything, to get you from that point to being able to snatch and clean and jerk at a level where you could go compete at the national championships. And so that was kind of the idea I had. And so that's why it's such a big book, is because that's a lot of information. Like, there's a lot of steps in there in that process.
Yeah, and I got to say, you break it down at a very elemental level so that you have a stepwise progression that you can readily see as you're reading through the book. It really starts out with base level fundamentals and then kind of layers on all the higher level thinking that you would wind up wanting that athlete to start thinking about, and the coaches to start thinking about, when proficiency at those more entry level, modest pieces of information starts to ingrain in what they do, and then they can really start to apply that second tier of thinking.
Yeah. Well, I think it came at a very transitional period in the sport, within Northern California in particular, or excuse me, North America. Um, in that, prior to that time, weightlifting was very small, very obscure, and the athletes getting into it were good, talented athletes. And what I mean by that is, in order to teach them how to snatch and clean and jerk, it wasn't that much of a stretch, right?
Mm.
It's the kind of person, like, that's how my wife learned, is, hey, you see what those guys are doing? That's a snatch. Go do it. That's how she learned how to snatch. And I think what was happening is that, largely because of the influence of CrossFit, you were having more and more people come into the sport interested, wanting to learn how to do this, wanting to get good at it, who did not have athletic backgrounds, or at least relevant athletic backgrounds, and they didn't have those natural abilities to just pick something up by mimicking another athlete. And so it was, I think, again, the timing was right that I was providing something that was broken down so much. Because I remember clearly looking at other coaches' teaching progressions for the snatch and thinking, this is not a teaching progression. That this doesn't teach you anything. It was like, step one, snatch from the hang. Step two, snatch from the knee. Step two, snatch from the floor. It's like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? How do you snatch? Like, just going from the hang instead of the floor first is not much of a regression or a progression. It's just a different position. So it was like, how do I get someone who, like, literally, again, can't even squat? How do I teach them how to snatch and clean and jerk?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because in like various of your social media posts, you'll have posts where you'll ask people to ask whatever question they want of you, and the array of questions that you respond to it's pretty broad, from very experienced lifters based on what it is that they're asking about, to complete novices that are asking some of those same foundational questions. And so you're able to respond to them really well, and treat them all, in my mind anyway, with the same level of respect, regardless of whether they're a super experienced lifter and they're asking for some refinement of a technique that a beginner would never touch, versus asking something foundational like, what's a hook grip for? And so you do a really good job of explaining those foundational pieces, and that seems to be kind of where your head was when you were crafting the language of the book. How much do you wind up having to revise and edit yourself when you go through the process of creating new editions of your book?
Yeah, well, that's something I need to get started on here soon, a fourth edition. It's see, books to me are frustrating in the sense that they are such permanent records, um, versus say like an online article. If I send an article to someone and I happen to glance at something, I'm like, ooh, I don't like that. I can go fix that. Oh, it's updated now. Done.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a book, that thing's been in print since 2008. I'm sitting there at 3:00 in the morning awake, like, God, that one part of that book is so bad. I'm so embarrassed. And like, you're stuck with it. So there's that aspect, but the good thing is that hopefully people have forgotten about that, first and second edition, and the third edition is great. But then, years later, well, what have I been doing? I've been coaching more and more and more, and I've been coaching more different people, and I'm learning. And so I find it interesting. Like, I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the US, like, we look at politics. If a politician changes their mind, they're seen as like weak and wishy-washy, and there's all these horrible things. That's like, yeah, but for any normal human being, like, you should be changing your mind over time as you learn and experience things. So I remind myself of that, and it's like, well, I'm doing things a little differently than I did, 8 years ago when this edition was out, but it's because I've gotten better at what I'm doing by gaining more experience, right? And so
Yeah.
I have to keep revising things in order to keep up with my own experience and my growing knowledge. And I learn how what I've done previously is received, like whether or not it was clear,
Mm-hmm.
whether or not, like, a lot of times there's stuff in there where I'm like, I still think this is correct, but the way I described it is confusing or misleading, and it's caused problems. So I need to change that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as coaches, we come up with, 5 or 6 different ways to articulate something, and it's not always received the same way by different audiences. So you're right.
Right.
There's an ongoing revision process, and a lot of that is informed by this long-term lab testing kind of environment that we're in, by day in,
Absolutely.
day out, experimenting, revising, and gradually coming to conclusions about what works more often than not
Yeah.
versus what we feel is the best way to describe something.
Well, and I think one of the worst things any coach or any sort of teacher can do is be, aggressively wed to a certain idea or methodology and be
Yeah.
totally unwilling to change that
You can't be rigid.
in the face of necessity, based on who you're working with. It might work for everybody you worked with for the first 2 years, and so you go, oh, well, this is perfect. Well, but it's not. There's no method is perfect, right? It's totally dependent on the people you're working with and their circumstances.
How did you come to provide, in addition to the book, you have this the certification program that you offer for coaches? How did that come about, and how do you implement that when you're located where you are? So how do you provide certifications for people? Do they have to come to you, or do you go to them, or do you send envoys to run your programs for you?
Well, we've only been located where we are since 2016. We're pretty isolated now. And I started doing seminars in 2007. So at that point, I started doing them when I was in Southern California. And then Amy and I moved back up to the San Francisco Bay Area and continued doing them there. But I was traveling. So originally, I was traveling myself doing them all. And then I got to a point where I couldn't travel that much anymore, and I especially couldn't handle the international travel. It took me away from home and from work for too long, and it was too exhausting. And so that's when I was sending other coaches to do it for me, especially the international stuff. So that's like, you got a staff up there in Halifax, for
Right.
example.
Yeah.
Although that's one I wish I would have gone to, but in any case,
We'll have you back
that
anytime.
that I got to come back. Well, I coach a guy in Nova Scotia now,
Yeah,
so
I know
I got to
Quinn.
come back up there
He's
one
a
of these days.
fantastic
Yeah.
lifter.
Oh yeah, he's a great guy. Um, so the seminar thing that totally comes from CrossFit. I never in a million years would have thought highly enough of myself to start providing seminars had I not seen that model played out through, the early CrossFit days. And had I not participated and helped coach in both, CrossFit seminars and certifications early on, I helped with some of those. And with Mike Bergner's, weightlifting seminars, both the USA weightlifting and CrossFit, and recognizing like, hey, I have the knowledge to do this. I have the capability to do it. So it's really just a matter of like having the confidence of being willing to try. And what it was somebody asked me to do one. So I said, oh, okay. So there's enough interest. I'll try it. And the first seminar I did, I had a ton of people. It went pretty well. I mean, I'm sure if I saw it on video now, I'd be mortified, but it went well enough that I was able to continue doing them. And the certification itself, that was another step where I was like, should I be offering a certification? Like, is this really something that I like am good enough to do? And again, it was like the demand is there. People want it. People like it. They think it's something worthwhile. I think I can do it well, so I'm going to do it. And that's, been chugging along for years now. So apparently it's okay.
I don't know what the different levels are like, but I know at least going through the level 1 certification that I did, one thing that I really appreciated about it as compared to the CrossFit certification process was that there were so many open-ended questions in the assessment. So, you said like, here's an example of an athlete, write a program and justify it. I really liked that because then it to me, it meant that there was a little bit more analysis going into the thought process and assessing whether or not the coach had internalized what they had learned over the course of the seminar and what they've taken away from your book.
I will admit it is a terrifying thing for me to basically put my name and reputation on the line under other people's control, right? So I have, okay, you're a Catalyst certified coach. Well, I'm not their monitor. I'm not supervising your coaching every day. You could be terrible, right? You could be like killing people and just doing such a bad job, and I'll never know. So it was like, how do I at least feel like I'm trying hard enough to ensure that they are capable of representing me in that way? And that, having the 2 component testing was part of that. I was like, yes, there's a big multiple choice one, so we can bang out some of the basic stuff, but there had to be a written part of it. Do you know how to teach the lifts according to my progression? Doesn't mean you have to do it that way, but can you do it if someone comes to you and says that's how they want to learn? And can you write programming? And so it's a lot more work for me. Like, I have to grade those tests manually. I have to go in there and read them. And then I have to be the mean guy who's like, nope, not even close. Please spend another couple of years studying. And they, like you always are going to get the people who just think they're going to be able to pass no matter what. Like they're used to certifications where it's basically certifying that you have a valid credit card. And I'm like, no. Like, you have to actually show me this stuff, and I will keep failing you. So people are getting better in general, I think, once they've recognized that they've heard that reputation. And so it gets easier for me because I don't want to fail people, but I'm also not going to pass them if they don't know what they're talking about.
I'm glad I wasn't in that position. One thing I really
this would be an awkward conversation.
Yeah, it certainly would. One thing I really appreciated about it as well is that you differentiate your certification in the fact that there is no recertification process.
Yeah, that always drove me nuts.
I think to me it recognizes that if somebody's going to go through the process of getting the certification in the first place, chances are they're going to use it. And from day one, they're getting more experience, more feedback from the community that they're using their knowledge with, and therefore presumably getting better at their craft rather than worse. And so that's something that kind of always drove me nuts about the CrossFit certifications, is this idea that at 5 years, you got to go do it again.
Yeah. Well, and like, CEU stuff for, say, like medical professions makes perfect sense. Technology and, information understanding is constantly changing.
Yeah.
Like I said, I worked on an ambulance. It's been over 20 years now. Like, CPR isn't even done the same way. Like things change.
Right.
Like you have to keep up with that stuff.
Yep.
But exactly as you said, if you are a working coach, unless you are a really terrible one, in which case you probably didn't get the certification in the first place anyway, you are learning, you are growing, you are expanding your toolbox, and you're getting better. So I don't need to make you pay me to check in to prove something to me that you've already proven, right? It just doesn't make any sense to me. And yeah, it's a nice money grab if you can get away with it, but I would feel like a scumbag for doing it.
So, how has the weightlifting environment changed over your time as a coach? I mean, there's been more entrance into the sport by virtue of CrossFit getting a little bit more attention to it, but there's still been entrance coming into weightlifting, not directly through CrossFit, but maybe through an awareness that CrossFit
Yeah.
might have engendered to the sport. But is it growing enough as a sport to really satisfy itself? And I mean, I know that there are still money challenges in the sport for sure.
Yeah, there are still money challenges, but my argument for that is it's an amateur sport here, right? It is not, it's an Olympic sport. It is not a professional sport. And if you are going into sport specifically to make money, then this is a bad sport to choose anyway, right? Um, there's plenty of opportunities for that in the US and Canada, right? Between NFL, CFL, and baseball, and all these different avenues you can choose. Go into one of those sports, you can make money and get girls. Um, weightlifting is one of those things where you really have to love the sport itself, even though it just beats you up all day long, every day for
Yeah.
years on end, and never loves you back usually. But so yes, to answer your question, I believe it is big enough now that we are able to satisfy the desire and the demands of the sport to be competitive internationally. Like you especially look at US women's team, and even Canada, you look like Mode Sharon, like for God's sake. Um, we have now enough of a talent pool, enough people coming in, that we are putting people on international podiums on a regular basis. And especially if you look at the youth and junior level before drug use starts really coming into play, we have world records, we have Pan Am records. Like, so it's this whole mythology that was built up for so many years that the US didn't know anything about weightlifting and we were so dumb and this and that, and the Chinese and the Russians and everybody had these like secrets that we didn't know just because we were bunch of dumb apes. um it's still out there, but we keep showing that it is total nonsense. And people are starting to come around and recognize that. Once we've had multiple world champions in all these things, and we don't have 12 people test positive every year at international meets, and so yes, I'm getting carried away here, but yes, I think the sport has grown a ton. Like the competitiveness for international teams in the US now is insane. Like the depth of the talent pool we have, especially on the women's side, again, is bananas. People totals that would have won a national championship 10 years ago won't even get you in an A session at nationals now. Like you're in a B or a C session. Like it's that competitive. So it's at a point now where the access to it is it's night and day. I mean, you can do weightlifting in like crunch gyms now in a lot of areas, which is remarkable to me. Like 24-hour fitness every once in a while used to have platforms, but crunch, uh, and then of course CrossFit gyms are everywhere, and nearly all of them have at least weightlifting equipment, if not platforms. So yeah, I think we're at a point now where we've kind of found that balance where there's enough access and enough interest that we're producing good lifters, and we're feeding the people below that elite level who just want to do it for fun, or they want to do it for health, or they want to do it for to support another sport. So I mean, and I can make a living. Like I don't have to go work at a bike shop anymore, or work on an ambulance, cleaning vomit and piss off of gurneys at 3 in the morning. So I'm psyched. I have no complaints.
Now, a bit of a shift here. Like I myself, I'm approaching 50. you're probably somewhere around my age, maybe a little
I'm
younger, maybe a
approaching
little lower.
44,
Uh,
orthopedically, maybe 60s.
so I'm curious, at least just to satisfy my own training, like how do you envision people bringing weightlifting training into their GPP training when they are an aging athlete to begin with? I mean, it's a very different. I got to figure that the approach to that athlete is going to be a little bit different. It's not just going to mark beginner versus experienced versus elite level athleticism.
Right.
It's also, you got to modify based on that person's training age and what their physical age is as well. How do you modify? I mean, you're dealing with elite level athletes only at this point, but through your training programs that are available for people to subscribe to, I have to presume that you're dealing with people that are in broader age ranges than that.
Oh,
So how do you
tons of
modify your
masters.
programming to help a master continue to make progress?
Masters athletes are tricky for so many reasons. And one of the biggest reasons is that the variation among them is just vast, right? So you can have someone who, say, is 50 years old, but has a 35-year athletic background, right? They were high level competitive athlete, even maybe in a power sport like a thrower or a lifter or whatever. And they're kind of continuing to train. Or you can have someone who's 50 and has been, an insurance adjuster, and like the most activity they do is mow the lawn once a week. And so you can't, that's why the master's programming question always gets me, where it's like, are master's programs gimmicks? It's like, well, no, but there's no such thing as like a master's program.
Right.
I did my best lifts at the age of 35, which is masters. And the only reason I stopped getting better is because I blew my shoulder out and then moved and had to do all this other stuff. And I couldn't ever get back following those things. So it has to be very individual. But in a broad sense, what you're needing to do is exactly what you said, is figure out what is the background here. So like, is there a good GPP base? Is this person generally like have athletic capabilities and a base of fitness that we can work from? Or do we have to build that, right? So you can go from kind of almost like rehabbing a former athlete, kind of getting them back into shape, or it's more similar to starting a child, where you are really going to start at the first stage, which is GPP. Like, you are going to be doing, basic body awareness stuff, lifts, carries, running, sprinting, jumping, really simple gymnastics type things. And creating the foundation, which then you gradually start tapering into a more of a specialization into weightlifting. So you follow that same formula regardless of who the person is. It's just that some of those stages are extremely accelerated based on what their previous experience is. And so I think it's almost more, in some sense, it's more challenging to take an older person who was an athlete, but then has been sedentary for a long time, because they will be able to move more quickly, but it's more dangerous, right? They're the ones who are going to get hurt, because not only physically do they have the ability to push themselves while also not having the resilience they used to, or the capacity, but they have that mindset where it's like, I need to push harder, I need to go heavier, I need to do more, because they have the mindset of the 25-year-old athlete, not the 50-year-old former athlete. And that's, as a coach, you have to be the one to kind of guide them through that, while satisfying their desire to do the sport, but also keeping them healthy so that they can continue doing it and still have fun over time.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, especially if they just if they haven't reestablished that resilience. I mean, it's not that they can't get it back again, or at least get it back to a degree, but it does take more time to establish that foundation at an older age as well.
Yeah. And the kind of people who tend to be attracted to weightlifting are the hard chargers. Like, they just want to go. And so you really have to rein them in enough. And there's a kind of this continuous process of convincing them that you have their best interests in mind, right? Like, I'm not trying to hold you back because I don't want you to get too good. I'm trying to hold you back so that we can get you and keep you as good as possible, long term. Like, you can come out of the gate super hard right now, achieve something real quick, but then in a year you're done. You got, bilateral shoulder surgeries and your knees blown out. Or we can kind of, ease into it over the course of a year or two, and you can get to a point where you are progressing steadily. You're enjoying training every day. You're not living on ibuprofen. So it's just kind of convincing them that it's for their own good.
Yeah. I've gotten stuck into that trap a couple of times myself where like I am not a former athlete by any means. I was a nerd in school, did enough sports to get by as a kid. But then, when I found a sport that I liked, I'd throw myself into it 100%. So martial arts
Yeah.
when I was in my teens and 20s, then I was a runner in my 30s, and then I found CrossFit in my 40s. And in every case, I kind of threw myself into it maybe a little bit more than I needed to, and started to feel nagging injuries that I had to dial it back a little bit and be a little bit more careful about ensuring that I had that resilience base before I started building back up again. And it's funny that after, despite the fact that cycle has occurred 3 times over 3 different sports, I still hadn't quite learned my lesson when I got into CrossFit, and still did
Yeah.
exactly the same thing and went hard charging into it. But at least
Well,
now
CrossFit's a tough
feeling a
one
little
too
better.
because of the community.
Yes, that is true. There's that little bit of rivalry that you always have, friendly rivalry with people in your class and the community, and you're
Yeah.
always kind of working to better yourself, but in a group environment. It's
Right.
like a nice little dynamic, but it can overwhelm you a little bit if you're somebody that has that real competitive fire.
Yeah. The classic Greg Glassman quote from many years ago at CERTS is, "Men will die for points." Right? It was just,
Yeah.
you get into a CrossFit class, and the friendly, the support, the rivalry, so it starts escalating, and all of a sudden you got 2 dead guys on the floor, but one of them's a winner, And so, yeah, it's this great atmosphere and culture and community, but you have to know how to use it to your advantage instead of to your detriment.
So when you're now focused exclusively on elite athletes, how many of them do you have training in your facility versus you providing remote coaching?
So for the last 5 years, I've only had one local lifter. Everybody else is remote, and actually, she's moving um, this month. So I'll finally be free of like actual set gym times, except for my own training. Which, as much as I like coaching people in person, and there's so many benefits to it. It's nice at this stage of my life to have that flexibility. Because for so many years I was in the gym from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. 5-6 days a week. And that makes the rest of life very difficult.
Given the time zones you
So,
have to cover, doesn't that still kind of rear its ugly head now and again?
well, you can remote coaching there's so many great things about it, and there are a lot of tricky things about it, obviously. And the time zone thing, yes, that can get tricky. Like, I have a Danish lifter, I have an Estonian lifter, I have a Norwegian lifter, I have a Slovakian one, but she lives in Michigan, so that's easy. And a few Canadians. And so yes, I get texts and check-ins in the middle of the night. Obviously, I'm not there coaching live. And so what you lose is the ability to make real-time adjustments in most cases. So for people who are in the same time zone, or we're kind of overlapping at the beginning and end of the day, I can do some real-time feedback and like, hey, let's change this, let's change that. But otherwise, you have to basically help your athletes learn how to be self-regulating to some extent, and kind of give them that guidance, like, hey, next week you have this workout in this situation, this is what I want you to do. And so, my programs are not written in stone. A lot of times, I will give people weight ranges for certain things, or I will, the way I do it, because I use Excel, is I'll have certain numbers are bold, either weights or reps, and say, hey, you have this many sets. If you're crushing it, you're feeling good, these bold sets are what you can take up. It's not a max. So I give them guidelines. And so the technology now makes it a lot easier, and it makes it a viable way to coach. I mean, my wife Amy coached Maddie Rogers to an Olympics remotely. Like, it is totally possible to do. Is it ideal? Probably not. Um, but again, it's a balance of, what do you want your lifestyle and your day to day to look like, versus what do you want to do professionally and, in terms of coaching. And so, Amy and I decided we want to live out here remotely. We fortunately have an airport fairly nearby because we both travel a lot. And we can bring in our athletes here a few times a year for training camps. They come in for a week, we house them. We do double day trainings. They get the bonding time. We get the one-on-one time. So to me, it's kind of like the perfect balance at this point in my life. I couldn't go back to being in a gym full time.
I'm sure the athletes benefit from that flexibility as well, too, because they're able to train in their own home environment without themselves having to move to a particular city in order to train, other than when they come to a training camp for some more specialized one-on-one training. But then
Yeah.
they have the flexibility and they can work in their home environment a little bit more readily.
The fact is, I'm not training professional weightlifters, right?
Yeah.
These guys are in school, they have jobs, they have things in their life that demand their attention and their time. And so, the idea of being able to have, if I had, I think I have, you asked, I think about a dozen lifters that I coach individually right now. The idea of somehow getting all 12 of them here, being able to pay rent, and like do all these things and train at the same time, it's impossible. There's no way to do it.
Yeah. Has the emergence of social media, particularly in the last 10 years, changed your approach to the training of your athletes in any way, or do you try to completely separate that from how they train, whether it's the pressures on you as their coach or they as athletes who are themselves churning content out in order to presumably down the line monetize their presence on social media with their exceptional performances on the national and international stages?
Yeah, social media is it's so multifaceted. Like, there's so many great things about it, and there are so many absolutely horrible things about it. It's a constant struggle and dilemma in my life. Like, every single day, I kind of struggle with it. I'm lucky in the sense that none of my athletes are super actively doing a whole lot on social media. Like, they are not trying to sell stuff. A couple of them do programming, like they offer programming, but that's not driving their performance, their lifting, or their social media content. Really, their content is really just like, here's some lifts I did today,
Right, like a reflection of their training, not
which is great because that helps me have content. And then the other great thing about remote training is that they have to send me videos, which means I have instant stuff I can post on Instagram. Like, here's Lenka doing a clean and jerk. I don't have to make something up for that, which is awesome. Of course, then I get people like, why isn't this in 4K? It's like, oh my God, man. It came across the world from, Norway 5 minutes ago through WhatsApp. Calm down. It hasn't changed the way I do things, other than that I often have to remind my lifters to stay off of social media in some periods of time, and for various reasons, because there is that the classic keeping up with the Joneses situation. Which,
I wondered about that.
You and I are familiar with that expression. I don't know how common that is now, but it's keeping up with the Kardashians now. But right, with this constant pressure to compete with, to compare with. What is everybody else doing? Why am I not doing that? And they're doing this exercise. Should I be doing that exercise? And so luckily most of my lifters are not like that. Like, I don't have to really fight them on that. But it is a common situation, especially so as we get close to competitions. I have a couple lifters where I'm like, you've got to delete Instagram off your phone. One of them is doing it on her own. She just figured that out, thankfully, on her own. So it's like little things like that. But the great thing about it is that I have so many videos on social media that when I'm trying to communicate something to one of my lifters, often I can tell them what I'm saying and then send them a video so they have the visual, because we're not in person. I can't sit there and like demonstrate something or
Right.
physically manipulate them. I have to show them, visually somehow. And so that's become very handy to me. Although I have to remember all the videos and try to find them in the moment. But
I'm sure it's a challenging in cataloging all the content that you've created.
the search function is very handy.
What impact has the removal of Olympic weightlifting from the Olympics themselves down the line had on the preparation that athletes are doing as athletes? I mean, are they still just entirely focused on their own competitive cycles, and the Olympics was just another competition among a long line of competitions that they were training for? Or were there some that were really hyper focused on that schedule?
To be honest, I think that no one is acting any differently yet, because they're
I mean, it's
we
still
don't
in
know
2024
for a fact
so,
yet. Yeah, we don't know for a fact yet, but it's looking somewhat better for 2028. And so I think it's going to be one of those things where no one accepts that as the actual truth until it is 100% in writing,
right.
done.
Yeah.
And at that point, the reality is that as much as I will be upset if it is no longer in the Olympics, because it's going to be such a stupid reason for not being in the Olympics. The percentage of participants in the sport who are actually Olympic contenders is so tiny that I don't think it's going to have much of an impact, if any, overall, right? And you're still going to have world championships. You're still going to have the continental championships and Grand Prix and all these, major international competitions that are still the best of the best. So it's not like that is going to cause the sport to fall apart. The one concern I would have is new federations forming and seeing what happened like in powerlifting, where there's 80 world champions every year, 80 world record holders in the same weight class for the same lift,
fracturing the sport further.
Yeah. Right. And I don't think that's really going to happen, because we still have one governing body for the sport internationally, the IWF. But we need a lot of fixes and changes to the various federations, and it's not something I want to be involved in, because it's just politics and I can't stand it any more than regular politics. But thankfully, we have great people like, Ursula Garza Papandrea, who's working her butt off tirelessly and thanklessly to try to keep things moving in the right direction.
When you travel around the world, or when you were traveling around the world providing training seminars, or even training camps on the road, how did you determine where and when you would travel? Or were they targets of opportunity, or were you planning specifically in order to reach out to specific areas around either North America or internationally?
Totally opportunistic. It was basically someone would reach out and say, "Hey, I want to host a seminar," and I would determine if it was a viable location, essentially based on it. Is it a big enough population center, and is there a nearby airport? And of course, is the facility appropriate? So I'm not. I get requests from small, like, rural areas, and I would love to come out there, but I can't. I can't come out there to coach 6 of you. Like, I get that you guys want to have, yourself and your staff attend this thing, but you're going to have to send them to somewhere else. Like, I can't go to every place that wants me to come. Like, it has to be, I got to be able to get 30 plus people in there, which means it has to be accessible to as many people as possible, meaning big city, big airport. So it's opportunistic in that sense. And then I basically just, what I try to do is pick places that cover the US. Obviously, I don't want to just be like all West Coast or all East Coast. And then internationally, it's that was always like basically whoever wanted to do it and had an appropriate facility. especially when I wasn't traveling. I'm like, I don't care. I'll send you guys anywhere. Like, I'm not the one who has to fly for 20 hours to
I don't
Australia
remember
and
the
go
name of the
knock
person
yourself
that came
out.
and did ours in, I'm going to say it was 2018 when I did mine. I can't remember for sure, but I think it was
It was
around there.
probably Kara, who actually is Canadian.
No, it was a guy that came from the UK.
Mark. Yeah, Mark Beck.
There, yeah.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah, it was, I mean, it was a fantastic session. We crammed the gym because our gym was an okay size. We had sort of two halves, and so it was a tight fit for the number of people that were in there for the seminar. But it was extremely well attended and very well received.
Awesome.
I'd love to find an excuse to have
coach.
You come out to the East Coast again.
Well, one of these days I will. I keep saying that. I'm like, next year is going to calm down. I'll be able to do stuff. And then that year comes as like, it's worse than last year. This has been one of those years where it was like, oh my God, it's never going to end. So maybe 2024, it's going to be my year.
Well, I mean, maybe Quinn will be able to get the bug in your ear and we'll be able to organize something to give you a reason to come out here.
I mean, man, I've done Vancouver, I think twice. I've done Calgary at least once. I've done Toronto at least twice. So I would love to get way out there to the East Coast. And I've never been there. I'd like to see it, let alone, aside from just doing a seminar.
Right.
This seems like a cool place.
So what's next for Catalyst Athletics? I mean, I know you're still
retirement.
Let's hope it's not real soon.
No.
Keep sharing your knowledge. Like I know you relaunched the library on your website. Principally just upgrading the content and upgrading the resolution on a lot of the videos as well.
Got to get those 4K videos for these people. They're very demanding.
What else is next? I mean, clearly you've got the 4th edition of your book to work on next. Yep. What comes next?
So that'll be a big one. I've been I still have more of the exercise library to do. I have a lot of website updates and changes to make. So a big thrust of mine right now is, because I have so much information, so much content, like making it accessible and, like you said, cataloging it and allowing people to actually find what they need is a huge problem. Like, it is very hard. So like with programming, I have to basically redo the whole system to help people find what they need and what's appropriate for them. And so that's my current big push, is to get on that, because that, to me, it's one of those things that is a big source of income for me. And I'm just throwing so much of it away because it's too difficult for people to find what they need. So it's like, I have it, but they don't know it because they can't find it. So things like that, the book, we are going to continue doing training camps at least a couple times a year here in Oregon. I would like to be able to get back to doing, maybe 2 seminars a year. I think that's reasonable if things are not totally insane. And then otherwise, honestly, it's finding ways to continue to streamline what I do so I have more time to live a life outside of just making content, because it's been just all consuming for, over 15 years now. It's really exhausting, to be honest.
Yeah. How do you manage the process of continuing to churn out relevant and new content on such a regular basis? The questions from the community help, because then it kind of almost generates itself.
And I was going to mention that earlier, talking about the Q&As on Instagram, is that is a way for me to give people access to me and help a lot of people, but it also keeps me in touch with what people are thinking about and confused about. So it's helpful to me too, because I can see, I have massive lists of potential videos to make. And so every week it's like, God, where am I going to start? I can't do this one because I need to video this, and I can't do that because my neck is jacked up right now. And so it's this constant process of trying to figure out what I can and can't do, and what I think people want to hear, and then not getting stuck in like, oh, I just, for 8 weeks I've put out all jerk related videos and people are sick of that. They want some snatch stuff or clean stuff. And so I honestly don't have a real formulaic system for it. It's kind of like, whenever I have an idea, I write it down on my phone, then I transfer it to my, my desktop list, and I make notes when they come to my head. And then when I got to make a video, I'm like, oh crap, it's Friday. I got to make a video for Monday. I kind of go through my list and I'm like, what do I have like the mental bandwidth to do right now? Is this a video I can make right now and do it well? Because a lot of times there's a video I'm like, this is the one I want to do, but I do not have the time and the energy to do it right. So I'm going to have to wait. So I got a lot of those too, where it's like longer format videos, more in-depth stuff. And I just haven't had the time and the energy to even get started on a lot of those. So that's part of it too, is coming up with a better system and a schedule. And every time I've had like a content schedule, it lasts for like 2 weeks. And then it's like, there's just too much.
Yeah.
There's too much variability in my day-to-day life for me to stick to it. And then it just becomes this thing where it's like a burden.
Yeah. You wind up fighting against the plan rather than following it.
Yeah. It's so that's the big problem with social media, is that there is a demand, and it's a literal demand, because if you do not do certain things, your content does not get served to even your own followers. They don't see it. And I've seen it happen with Instagram. Like my content hardly gets served to even my own followers. It's like the most frustrating thing ever, but it's because everything is perishable now, right? You put a video out and it's in 48 hours. It's like it doesn't exist. Versus prior to those platforms, it's like I put a video on my website, that thing's killing it for 8 years, right? Because it's still the same good information. So that's a little soul crushing to me. That constant like push to more and more and more and more. And then, having to compete with people who've got $80,000 camera rigs. And I'm like, well, okay, I'm not going to do that. Like I'm not going to hire a media team. That's the other part of it too, that I don't think a lot of people don't understand, is I do everything. I don't have media guys. I don't have a website guy. Like I do it all, and it's a ton of work. But the reason I do it is because I can do whatever I want, when I want, the way I want. I'm not beholden to anybody else. I don't have to wait for people. And every time over the years that I have tried to hire people to do work, I have been disappointed and frustrated, and it's just a miserable experience. So I would rather be less successful in terms of social media stats and financially, and not hate my day-to-day life, right? Than go like full blown corporate mode and like have, a PR person, a video guy, a photo guy, a ghostwriter, and all these things, someone who's actually posting on Instagram pretending to be me. I don't want it. Like I don't want to have that life.
Yeah. And that's a lot of mouths to feed too.
Exactly. I got a big enough one right here on my face. And my wife and I are slowly collecting a zoo of animals. So we got mouths aplenty.
Well, Greg, I can't thank you enough for chatting with me. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to following up on all the various different content discussions that you continue to have with your extensive audience on social media. Whether you love social media or hate it, the audience out there is certainly pretty keen for the content that you're putting out, especially since you put it out with a degree of humor and you don't take the process terribly seriously. It seems like you're really just enjoying sharing what you've spent decades learning how to do.
I'm trying to become more wiser and more mature in my old age, and learning to not force myself to do things I hate when I don't need to. So yes, I overall, I love social media, right? That is largely what has allowed both my wife and me to, have the job that we have. But like any job, there's some downsides.
For sure. All right. Thanks, Greg. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We've come to the end of another episode. All that's left is the M wrap-up. Speaking with Greg was a long-held aspiration of mine, and I'm thrilled I finally got up the nerve to ask, and grateful that he was so quick to agree to spending time chatting. What struck me when I took his L1 certification course and read his book was how thoughtful and analytical the program was. When you watch his extensive library of movement videos and take the time to read one of his several books, you get the impression that his passion for weightlifting, his deep love of the process of training, is what's really driving him. He relentlessly refines the way he communicates and the how and the why behind each element of training that he advocates for other lifters of all experience levels to follow. And that really sets him apart. His content rarely makes any assumptions about his audience's level of understanding, but he doesn't dumb it down unnecessarily either. He excels at balancing the foundational essence of what needs to be understood while layering on some more complex and advanced themes that are digested differently based on his audience's experience. There's a reason he's so well respected as a weightlifting coach. His delivery of weightlifting concepts in an accessible form is a masterclass in communication. It delivers for athletes and coaches of all levels. Whether you're just picking up a barbell for your first experience with the Olympic lifts, or you're an athlete with decades in the sport, it's hard to imagine you not being able to find tremendous value and learning from Greg. If his rise is, as he suggested, partly due to his entering the space when the field was less crowded, everyone who pursues Olympic weightlifting in any capacity is benefiting from Greg seeing and seizing that opportunity. He has, in my view, made his mark on what weightlifting is today and what it will look like for years to come. If you want to get better at the clean and jerk and snatch, whether it's for its own sake or part of your training in other disciplines like CrossFit, you absolutely have to follow Greg at Catalyst Athletics on Instagram and seek out the Catalyst Athletics channel on YouTube. I'll include links to those channels in the show notes as well. If you like this episode, please share it with others or even write a review on Apple Podcasts. It does help other fitness-minded people find the podcast. And if you have any ideas or questions, send me an email at podcast@boxjumper.ca. And be sure to follow me on Facebook and Instagram with the handle @BoxJumperOver40. Thanks again for listening. Be sure to follow or subscribe in your favorite podcasting app so that you get the next episode when it's released. Until then, stay healthy, WOD happy, and WOD often.